Concluding our session today about restoring shellfish, our last speaker in the session is Geselbracht, again with the Nature Conservancy. Thanks for all the good work you're doing. And the topic is building coastal resilience in the Charlotte Harbor region and beyond.
Thank you.
Please welcome Laura.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our coastal resilience work here in the Charlotte Harbor area, and certainly this work has been done with a lot of partners, and a lot of work has gone before we became involved here. So this is the first slide. There. Yeah. So I just wanted to point out that this work has been done in collaboration with some of my colleagues at the Nature Conservancy, Freeman, who modeled the sea level rise impacts on coastal wetland systems, Shepard, who was very involved in our project that recently finished, an EPA-funded project on coastal resilience with the city of Punta Gorda, and Birch, who's in the audience, and you heard from a little bit earlier. So as you know, sea level is rising, and some of the recent information from a National Climate Assessment 2012 was that they gave a range of high probability sea level rise, somewhere between 0.2 meters and 2 meters. So actually the work we did looked at sea level rise scenarios between 0.7 meters and 2 meters, so it's certainly within that range. And, in the last few years, there's been a lot of events where it's becoming more and more clear that we're beginning to see the effects of sea level rise on our communities, flooded streets at high tide, and during storm events and things of that nature. So the time to prepare is now, and efforts are underway, as I mentioned. You've undoubtedly heard probably earlier in this conference that there's efforts being done by the National Estuary Program. It's certainly in their plan to work on these issues. There have been other assessments, Southwest Florida and Charlotte Harbor Climate Change Vulnerability Assessment, a Lee County similar type of plan, and Punta Gorda Adaptation Plan. So certainly it's an area where people are aware and doing things, and that's really to be congratulated. That's not happening everywhere in the state, and it's not happening nationwide by any means. So congratulations for being a leader in that area. So just to point out, Nature Conservancy, the things we've been doing, what we call our coastal resilience work is really adaptation to climate change, and how the various aspects of how we do that is to assess risk and vulnerability. That's the science behind it. Identify solutions, and that's done collaboratively with partners. Taking action, also done collaboratively with partners, and then measuring the effectiveness of the actions where we can, especially on the efforts that we implement. So I just want to point out we have a website called coastalresilience.org. Not only do we have some information there on our various adaptation efforts, but we also have mapping tools there. As well, interactive mapping tools that have a variety of information, and we do hold webinars from time to time giving people some tutorial on how to use that system, and it can help in many ways, from assessing risk to identifying areas for restoration, looking at vulnerabilities resulting from sea level rise. So this is just to point out a few of the partnerships that we have ongoing right now with the National Estuary Program, Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council, the Department of Environmental Protection, and particularly the Office of Coastal and Aquatic Managed Areas, the City of Punta Gorda, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and we hope to expand this list greatly in the next few years. We'd certainly like to work with a lot more local governments and other entities, because it really does take a collaborative effort to implement these adaptation strategies. So some of the science behind our work was we did some analysis on how sea level rise would affect coastal habitats and the communities in those areas. And we looked at 10 different sites across the Gulf of Mexico. 6 of them in Florida, and we looked at 3 different sea level rise scenarios. We used the sea level affecting marshes model. Some of you may be aware of it. It's called SLAM for short. And not only did we get the results of this and bring this, we brought this to the communities where we did these analyses. We held some stakeholder meetings, presented those analyses along with some work we did on impacts to vulnerable species, vulnerable infrastructure, and then we had the participants at those workshops provide us information on adaptation strategies. So I just want to highlight with this slide that this is what it looks like on the Coastal Resilience website, the mapping application of that for Charlotte Harbor area. You can do a split screen of these interactive maps. You can zoom in and zoom out. On the left-hand side is the existing conditions of coastal habitats, primarily wetlands, and on the right side is at the year 2100 under a 1 meter scenario sea level rise. So So this is the spatial information. We also have quantitative information, tabular information. We have full reports on these analyses that are available on the Coastal Resilience website under the resources section. So there's a lot of data there. I can only just really touch on it for this presentation. For example, on the left-hand side of the map, you'll notice, oops, I touched it and it actually moved. On the left-hand side there, you can see that there's a lot of tidal flats that will become more inundated, of course, with sea level rise. That's a concern for the species, certainly, that utilize those tide flats for feeding and other purposes. There's winners and losers in every event, so maybe eventually some of that could become seagrass beds, but it wouldn't be available, say, for wading bird feeding or for different, other purposes that's currently explored. So that's one area of loss. Others, the other thing that is evident in the results from the Charlotte Harbor area is that mangrove habitat, mangrove forests, will likely increase because other coastal wetland systems will become too salty, too inundated to persist. So we'll have an expansion of some habitat types like mangroves. So I mentioned these community workshops. This was the one we held here in Charlotte Harbor at this very facility. This is such a great facility for meetings, certainly. And I mentioned that adaptation strategies were developed. I think we had about between 100 and 120 different adaptation strategies developed in a whole variety of categories, everything from land use planning to land conservation, tax-based incentives, education, research. And in every meeting we held at the various locations that you saw around the state that we did our work, I don't think I mentioned them verbally. It was Pensacola Bay, Apalachicola Bay, Southern Big Bend, Choctawhatchee and St. Andrews Bay, Tampa Bay, and Charlotte Harbor. At the places where we held these meetings, the majority of comments focused on education and outreach. So it was very interesting to see that, over and over again, that those were education and all different types of education from, kindergarten to college to general public to elected officials to, agency folks. So every level of education you can think of that was highly emphasized. But also tax-based incentives, land conservation, building and land use, those were also popular options. And because these were developed to be locally relevant and by people in the communities, they're a good start for ideas for adaptation strategies to pursue in the area. Of course, every local government, along with their citizens, will have to decide exactly what they want to pursue and what makes most sense for their needs. We've been working with the city of Punta Gorda. They're very receptive, I think, as you all know, to this idea of coastal resilience and adaptation planning. They They have a plan. They're beginning to implement some elements of that plan, and we're helping with one of those elements. And also, we're working with them on developing an oyster reef restoration project off of the Trapeview Harbor Rock. So in their master plan, or excuse me, in their adaptation plan, the element that we're assisting with is explicitly indicating local master plans, in parentheses, their comprehensive plan, which areas will retain natural shorelines. So one of the things that we were able to assist with is to show from our sea level rise modeling areas that we know, of course, are existing mangrove areas, but also areas that will likely be mangrove areas in the future, and those are the ones in yellow. So in those areas, it's probably a very good idea to maintain natural shorelines so that you can allow those mangroves to migrate as sea level rises. We know that mangroves provide some protection to the built environment, to communities adjacent and behind those mangroves. They help minimize some of the wind energy and surge energy, so those natural systems do serve a valuable function for communities. So supporting those is really helpful from a coastal resilience perspective, not to mention the ecological value of those mangroves or nursery for all the great fishing that people do in the Charlotte Harbor area. So here's a map that we developed at one of the coastal resilience workshops we held, where after we familiarized people with the coastal resilience website and interactive maps, we had people from the Punta Gorda area put dots on a map to identify areas that should retain that they would recommend should retain a natural shoreline. Those are the dots in green, and areas where that's probably a foregone conclusion in red, where there's already some hardened infrastructure in place. And then in green, we asked people to identify oyster areas that might be promising for oyster reef restoration. And it looks from the placement of the maps, these are areas where mangroves currently exist or are slated to exist, and where oyster reefs might help support the persistence of those mangroves, even in some of the higher rates of sea level rise. So we took that information and we did some reconnaissance. We looked all around, as you probably heard in some earlier talks, to identify the location for those for our oyster reef project. But certainly this map, what I want to point out on this map is to show you, I can't point it out very well, but if you look just to the northeast of US 41, that's Trapeview Harbor Walk. And it's hard to see on this map because one color is purple and one is like a red, and they blend together. But the purple shows the existing mangrove forest there. And on the right side map, this is the 2-meter sea level rise scenario map. That mangrove forest disappears. So what this tells us is, we don't know exactly how fast sea level is going to rise, certainly, but we know that that mangrove forest area is a little more vulnerable to a faster rate of sea level rise. So anything you can do to help support that over time, whether it be reconnecting it, which is a little impossible at this point, to other natural systems because there's a lot of development behind it, or perhaps slowing some of the erosional conditions in front of it and minimizing the loss of sediment by placing oyster reef in that area could be helpful. We're just doing, as you saw, a pilot project, so we're not close to that yet, but maybe over time we can expand that reef to some extent and help support that particular mangrove forest over time. And City of Punta Gorda, so measuring the effectiveness of these actions, that's the last component of our coastal resilience work, and it's a full circle, it's an adaptive process, so that once you measure the effectiveness, if you need to make some adjustments, you go through the process again of identifying what the problems were and implementing solutions and then measuring the effects. So as far as measurement goes, in the City of Punta Gorda, maintaining those natural shorelines, that's a difficult thing thing to measure in the short term. It really is going to take a long-term approach to measurement to maybe come back every 5 years and see what areas have been designated as maintaining natural shoreline, and then maybe 10, 20 years down the road to see if those areas that have maintained the natural shoreline have persisted in their natural state and what's their status. So it is more of a long-term monitoring measurement type thing. For developing an oyster reef restoration or creation project off Treveview Harbor Walk, that's something we can begin to measure much in the nearer term, certainly. So we've developed a monitoring plan for that project. We're going to be looking at not only the effectiveness of the restoration methods, but also the effects of this reef system on the surrounding habitats and the existing shoreline and mangrove forest to see if there is any sedimentation occurring. It may be kind of tough to see on small pilot project scale, but just by beginning to implement this monitoring plan and then perhaps in the future expanding that project, we'll be able to see some effects. So that's pretty much it that I have. Any questions? I just put the reference here for that National Climate Assessment project. And any questions for this one?
Hello. Has there been any discussion about the role of land acquisition and preservation in the resilience strategy?
Well, specifically with particular local governments, I don't know. As we all know, the economy hasn't been great, and land acquisition was a huge part of a lot of counties and the state previously. So it certainly should be, because that makes a lot of sense. Purchasing land that may eventually become submerged or having some type of program to preserve that land over time really does make a lot of sense. And maybe with the improving economy, we'll be able to see some land acquisition programs.
Just as a comment, I think that fits really well with some of the fish and wildlife discussions today, which you didn't hear, but where they talked about the value of the floodplain to the economy of the fisheries. And those floodplains are also flood prone, so that makes a lot of sense. I have a question. Did you look at infrastructure costs? I work for a stormwater program, and things like Fukushima, where we realized they built a generator system, a backup generator system below sea level or whatever it was, subject to inundation. Is that part of the concept you're looking at?
Yes, so I didn't get a chance to show you some of the maps from our sea level rise analysis, but part of the work that we assembled before our community meetings was to look at effects of sea level rise on infrastructure. And we didn't do it in a quantitative sense, we did it in more a spatial mapped sense, where people could see what roads and outfalls and sewage treatment plants, hospitals, schools would be affected by a 1 meter rise in sea level. So those are the kinds of things that should certainly be considerations of any coastal resilience or adaptation plans at the local government level. And planning now and then you plan over 25 to 50 year horizon, it's going to be a lot more cost effective than trying to respond after a major event.
I can tell you, in Sarasota County and in Ellis County, there are two that I know of. We're looking at infrastructure of stormwater pipes under roads that are subject to collapse, so there's a safety issue. And we have a big initiative, and they do, to examine those and replace them as we need. So I think and I'm positive we're not looking at climate change in that analysis. So it might be that the right analysis would say this needs to be sized differently for a 50-year life cycle of this infrastructure piece. I don't know if that's a benefit.
Yeah, that's important stuff.
I just wanted to ask a question. This is I guess the first time in the last 2 days that we've heard somebody talk and been involved with an outreach education, and this was a big component of what you've been doing with all these workshops and everything. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about is how important was terminology, how important was how you presented this information to your audience. In my experience, I work with climate change, and I have sensed that depending upon the audience, it's a very important thing that you do and how you use your terminology. And I wonder if you could say any word about that.
I think terminology is very important, and our audiences were pretty much, professionals that dealt with, or at least had the potential to deal with climate change. So we didn't get any negative reactions that way. And the other thing was we focused on sea level rise, and we didn't really talk about how it was caused or what was causing it. So I think that was beneficial. Some of the feedback we got from our stakeholders was that they recommended, there's a website, I guess, called Waterwords that work, that choosing your words is really important, and you really do have to gear it to the audience. I think it might be kind of tough to go up against the very skeptical audience, and I have some of those in my own family. It can be a real challenge. I'm not sure if you ever really win, but you might gain on some